couple of months ago, I made a video on what I thought was the best cup in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and the series as a whole, the Star Cup. This contained some of the best tracks in the series like Mount Wario and Electrodrome. However, that's what's known as a Nitro Cup, meaning it's entirely made up of tracks that were specifically created for Mario Kart 8. In my opinion, there are 3 different cup types in Mario Kart: Nitro, as we just said, Retro Cups, which are made up entirely of retro tracks, and Mixed Cups, which have a combination of tracks. Today, I want to take a look at that second category, because what makes a good retro track is fairly different from what makes a good Nitro track. Not only do you have to keep what made the original so good, but you also have to adapt it into the new game. So I want to cover what I believe to be the best retro cup in the Mario Kart series, that being the Lightning Cup. Welcome to another episode of Level by Level. In this video, I'm going to take a look at the 4 tracks included in this cup and explain why I believe each of them contribute to making this cup so good. Oh, I should probably say what those tracks are, huh? The 4 in the Lightning Cup are Tick Tock Clock from Mario Kart DS, Piranha Plant Slide from Mario Kart 7, Grumble Volcano from Mario Kart Wii, and Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 64. So without much more delay, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right into our first track. First up, we have Tick Tock Clock. Now, I want to start each of these segments focusing on the track's aesthetic before getting into the layout. Not only are aesthetics very important on any track, but I think these 4 in particular excel at it. So Tick Tock Clock, as the name implies, takes place inside of a clock. This is actually one of the few Mario Kart tracks to be based on a location in the mainline series, being Tick Tock Clock from Mario 64. Seeing as that game is my second favorite Mario game behind Mario Odyssey, I think it's safe to say that I'm a pretty big fan of the idea to include it. I mean, Tick Tock Clock itself isn't my favorite course in the world, but it's still cool, I guess. No other track is similar to it at all, and it makes this one of the most memorable in the series. Many of the elements on the track, like the swinging pendulums, are lifted right from Mario 64. If you look at their design in the original Mario Kart DS version, they are exactly the same. I think now is as good a time as ever to mention the massive glow up this track and the other 3 tracks got from their original to 8. If you've ever heard anyone complain about the Booster Course Pass graphics, the original retro tracks are the reason why. Not only are the graphics just updated to make them look like their Mario Kart 8 tracks, but the designs themselves have received a pretty big makeover. I mean, let's just look at Tick Tock Clock here and compare it to the original. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the background is significantly more populated, having a ton of gears placed around the track. The original background in DS is almost entirely empty, which does make sense on a less powerful piece of hardware. This was a fantastic change as it makes the track feel so much more alive. Not only that, but several sections of the track are now more closed in than they were before. Not only does the pendulum section actually have a roof going over it, but the section on top of the several gears is now completely enclosed. I know it's unrealistic to say this, but it makes the track feel sort of like an actual place. The original was just sort of floating over nothing, which again worked in DS, but man, it looks fantastic here. There are so many aesthetic changes for this track, like the alarm clock starting line, the clock face in the background, and more, that it'd be impossible to go over them all. If I were to say one thing that was kinda sad about the remake, I sort of like the numbers on the banners in the background in DS, as it was a reference to Mario 64, but it's really not that big of a deal. Oh, and we can't forget about the music. As with every Mario Kart 8 Deluxe song, it's a banger. I also like that they threw clock sound effects in here as well. It's really cute. But aesthetics are obviously not the main element of a track, as the actual layout is the main thing to consider when determining if a track is fun. Since these are all retro tracks as well, I'm going to compare them to their original as we go. Starting off the race, everyone has to go straight up a ramp before taking a sharp left turn up another one. And right away, we are already at our first change. In the original on DS, this ramp after the turn is much longer and has item boxes, but Mario Kart 8 Deluxe changes this by moving the item boxes onto the clock and splitting this ramp into 2. This lets the player trick off the ramp instead of just sticking to it, which is a nice change since tricking wasn't introduced until the game after DS, Mario Kart Wii. Speaking of the upcoming clock, this received one of the biggest changes in the entire track. In the original, this was a tight area where players had to avoid clock hands as they would cause the player to spin out if touched. While the player could easily go around them, boost panels were placed near the center to incentivize going closer. I think that system worked fairly well, though I think I do prefer Mario Kart 8's version. Now, instead of the deadly bright red hands, seriously, why were they bright red? They looked so weird. Now the hands act as places to trick on. More importantly though, you can actually ride on top of them to cut through the center of the clock for a shortcut. This is a really neat addition. It's very difficult to stay on the hands due to how skinny they are, but it makes it all the better when you successfully cross them. We'll see another shortcut like this later, but this was a good introduction to the concept. The clock also has the boost panels from the original, but the outer layer also has some coins, which gives the player a choice between speed in the moment or building up coins to go faster later. After the clock, we then enter the section with the 2 pendulums. Well, I should say it now has 2 pendulums because the original track actually only had the second one. I think the addition of the other pendulum is nice to add some more action to the track. Both pendulums are placed at jumps in Mario Kart 8 as well, which I also like as the tricking system adds a bit more speed, and since these act as walls instead of damaging obstacles like the original, it causes a much harsher disruption as the player bonks and falls to the ground. Following the pendulums, we get the section that likely changed the most, the moving gears. In the original, you had to ride across these spinning gears, and you had to try and ride on the right side to not slow you down. Mario Kart 8 not only made each gear have a place to jump off of, but they also gave this section a glider ramp. This was a absolutely perfect place to throw this in, as it obviously was a new feature for Mario Kart 7. There's even some coins you could get in the air while gliding. You can't glide over for every gear though, so you do have to still ride on a few, which is nice. Coming off of the gears, we reach one of the biggest changes to the layout yet, being the second clock. In the original, this was basically just a copy of the first clock, but in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, we only have half of it to drive on. More importantly though, this also is the clock hand shortcut, which I think works even better than the first one due to how difficult turning onto the hands can be. The time save here is more than worth it though, and since this doesn't require a mushroom at all, this is one of my favorite shortcuts in the series. And finally, to end off this track, we have two massive gears facing the finish line, and depending on what lap you reach them, one will be spinning toward the goal and the other will be spinning away. Trying to get on the right gear for the extra speed boost is always a nice treat to end off the race. But that's it for Tick Tock Clock. If you couldn't tell, this is one of my favorite Mario Kart tracks, period. Not only is the idea well executed, but the elements are used in a way that fit a clock-themed racetrack so perfectly. The shortcuts were such phenomenal additions for Mario Kart 8, and if you add on the glider ramp and second pendulum, you get one of the best remakes for any track in the series. Already, this cup is off to a fantastic start. But let's see if our second track here, Piranha Plant Slide, can keep up the pace. First of all, we got the aesthetics. This is sort of based on older mainline Mario games. OMG, so retro! It has a ton of elements ripped straight from them, such as the floating bricks inside the underground, the Goomba and Bush cutouts that look directly taken from Super Mario Bros., and my personal favorite that I didn't actually notice until making this, the ground tiles in this section have the same shape as the ground from Super Mario Bros. Outside of the epic retro aesthetic, this also obviously was based on the underground levels from various Mario titles. Surprisingly, this wasn't actually done in a track before this point, despite how common this level type is, so finally getting one was great. Pipes are also included all over the place here to fit in with the theme. I know I'm skipping ahead a bit, but the music also has a bit of the underground theme playing in it too, so I think they nailed the theming. Though I do actually have one major criticism of the Mario Kart 8 remake. In the original, the Goombas in the underground section were blue, which is of course a reference to how they look in the underground. However, they changed them to just be normal Goombas in Mario Kart 8. The poor blue Goombas have been treated so badly lately. I mean, getting removed from here and then they aren't even available in Mario Maker? We seriously need to get these guys some justice. I feel so bad for them. But yeah, I don't really have much more to touch on visually. I already mentioned the music a bit, and I think it's pretty good. I like Tick Tock Clock better, mostly because I never really liked the opening for this song, but otherwise it's great. Alright, onto the layout itself, and spoilers, this did not change nearly as much as Tick Tock Clock did. That makes total sense though, because this was from the game right before Mario Kart 8. There were still a few changes though, so we'll get to those when we get there. Starting off the track, we get to jump into some flowing water, which also happens to be the main gimmick of the track. Since the water pushes you forward, it's optimal to stay in it for as long as you can, which makes driving on this track fairly interesting. Jumping off of the water streams brings us into the pipe, which acts as a perfect transition to the underground portion. The water here is also deep enough for the player to go underneath, which will also play a big part later in the race. After turning the underground, we are met face to face with the first Piranha Plant of the track, along with a three-way split path. The left and right sides both go around the plant, but the middle acts as a very risky shortcut. Not only do you have to jump onto a skinny platform where you risk falling off, but the Piranha Plant can also bite you for attempting it. Generally, I just don't bother risking it, but the option is nice to have. The paths all converge into one section with the Goombas. Once again, rest in peace blue Goombas. The Goombas act as pretty solid obstacles due to the water, making it somewhat tricky to avoid them. After the Goombas though, we finally get to our first major change of the track. In the original, you would jump off of the water to land on some floating bricks with coins. These each had a different length and you could hop between them to get more coins, which is a cute reference to the platforming nature of the series. In Mario Kart 8 though, this all stays the same but the blocks are flipped, so the longest one, which was on the left in the original, is now on the right. Personally, I like this change since most people will be jumping off the left ramp, so it now requires a bit of extra effort to drive across. After the floating platforms though, the racers land back on the ground where a few mini pipes are placed to get coins and trick on. Not only are these cute little additions, but they can be surprisingly deadly. I'm serious, the way you jump off of these can easily lead you to flying off the edge, making this a bit of a larger risk than it may seem. But now we get to the big change from the original to 8, the underwater section. They decided to implement anti-gravity here, which I think fits in very well, making the segment much more enjoyable. In fact, coming from playing 8's version for so long, it's sort of weird going back to 7's. First off, the pipe entrance for 8 is much larger, which I think is perfect considering there are going to be 12 racers in 8 compared to the 8 and 7. Once entering into the underground section, the aesthetic feels almost entirely different. The 7 version is significantly tighter, having the walls right next to the track. In 8, however, the space is much more open, even having some Cheep Cheeps swimming by. I love what 8 did here as it makes the track feel so much more grand. It's seriously hard going back to the original. Layout-wise, these are also pretty different. Not only is 8 much larger, but it also got a few different obstacles as well. The 7 version reuses the mini pipes we saw before, however 8 has some pipes blowing air, which I think is a bit more interesting. Both versions end in a similar way though, as we have a second Piranha Plant with a three-way split path. The left is just a standard road, the right has a boost panel, and the middle actually changes based on the lap. As the race goes on, you'll eventually gain access to this upper road, which can be used to jump over the Piranha Plant. Seeing as that's essentially what you do in the main series, I think this fits in extremely well. To exit the underwater section, we have a fantastically placed glider ramp. I always love this small segment. Funnily enough though, this ending bit on the grass before the finish line I actually think was done better in 7. First off, I think the shortcuts to the bush cutouts are really cute. For some reason though, the 8 version removed the first one and only kept the second. Not really sure why. Another thing they removed was the second Goomba cutout. In 7, there were 3 Goombas here, 2 cutouts and 1 actual one. In 8 though, there's only 1 cutout and 1 actual, which I think makes the ending a bit less chaotic than it should be. Putting that aside though, I think this remake was also pretty solid. While I wouldn't say it's quite on the level of Tick Tock Clock, this is still a very solid track. The changes made to the underwater segment far outweigh the negative changes at the end, so I still think this was a pretty good remake. But now it's time for Wii's Grumble Volcano. This was always one of my favorite tracks from that game, similar to how Tick Tock Clock was one of my favorites from Mario Kart DS. This is based on, get this, a volcano. We've had plenty of lava tracks in the series, but they were all Bowser's Castle, so I think this was a really welcome track theme. I love the detail of having the question mark and brick blocks scattered around the course. It really does add a nice bit of color to it. The dead trees and dark red color for the sky really sell the danger of this track. You can even see the several background volcanoes exploding as the race goes on, which is just so perfect. Honestly, the aesthetic between Wii and 8 aren't that different, besides 8 obviously just making everything look nicer. The only real major visual change I could think of were the billboards, which I felt like were a bit off in the Wii version, so I much prefer the darker 8 ones based on Bullet Bill and Morton. Outside of visuals, the music here is another banger. I love listening to this one and it fits the course so perfectly. Not sure if I prefer this or Tick Tock Clock, they're both some of my favorite pieces. But now it's time to talk about the layout. Starting us off, we right away get a small jump and oops, we already missed our first change. This one is sadly a heartbreaker. If you all know anything about the original Wii version of Grumble Volcano, it's likely the ultra shortcut. Essentially, for reasons I don't feel like explaining, if you jumped over from the mainland to the small rock in the background, you could actually drive around it and get a lap to count. This was extremely absurd. It's far from the only one of these ultra shortcuts in Wii, but it's probably the most well known. Being able to skip the whole track is incredibly funny to me. Is it good game design? No, it's definitely not. But am I sad it's gone? A little bit. Well, regardless, after the first jump, we enter inside the volcano, which gives us a long turn over lava. Then we have to jump onto a moving platform, which I once again like as it sort of implements some more platforming into the track. If I did have to say one thing though, I kinda wish you could trick off of it. You can trick onto the platform, but for some reason, there wasn't a ramp placed on it to jump off, which makes coming off of it feel a bit unsatisfying. After the platform jump though, we are brought to a split path. The left goes on top and the right stays on ground level. I believe they're both the same speed-wise, so it's more just an excuse to have a skinnier road, which I do like. I personally always go for the top path whenever I can. The two paths quickly recombine and gives us a few platforms to jump off, but this is where we get our first major difference between the original and 8. In Wii, you just had to jump across these platforms, which worked decently, but 8 added a glider ramp which I prefer taking. Only does this prevent the unsatisfying jump off the platforms due to no tricking, but flying through the skies as rocks from the volcanoes come crashing down is just really cool. Honestly, I just wish they could have made it longer somehow, but what they have here is certainly a nice change. It even gives a bit of extra purpose to this boost panel at the right, as you can actually now trick off of it to extend the glider duration. But after that point is really when the track starts heating up. That was a pun, you can laugh now. Falling rocks come crashing down from the sky, causing the ground to set on fire. It's really unpredictable where they're going to land, so it makes driving here very difficult and a lot more fun. On top of the ground catching on fire, several fire snakes will jump around this ending bit of the track as well. With this being the second to last track of the cup, the difficulty spike here is more than welcome. The ending gives us the choice between two different paths. The left goes up and has a fire snake placed much later into it, whereas the right path stays down low and has a fire snake right at the start. It does however make you cross paths with another one near the end, which the top path gets to jump over, so there are plenty of reasons to take either path. One last addition that Mario Kart 8 made was that the left path now also has a glider ramp, which works for the exact same reasons the one earlier did. With one final jump, this course comes to an end. Or does it? See, I actually haven't mentioned this track's main gimmick yet, the fact that it falls apart as the race goes on. So once lap 2 starts, several chunks of land have gone missing or are currently in the process of sinking. This is one of the most genius track gimmicks in any course. Not only does it perfectly fit a volcano setting, but it makes each lap get more and more intense, which makes this track have a consistent rise in difficulty. This is the main reason it's one of my favorite tracks in the franchise, because these small changes really go a long way in boosting the track. Not only is this used to make the track more difficult, but it's also used to introduce a shortcut on lap 3. See, there's this massive chunk of land on the right path which will fall on lap 3 to reveal a small ramp. This is such a cool way to expand upon the gimmick. I'm super happy it was added. So while this track certainly didn't get updated as much as the last two, it really didn't need to be as it was already great. The changes it did get only helped make the track better, so I think it's safe to say this is another fantastic track for this cup. I think I prefer Tick Tock Clock a slight bit more, but Grumble Volcano is certainly not far behind. But that brings us to our final track of the Lightning Cup, and what better track to end us on than N64 Rainbow Road. Let's get the aesthetics out of the way. This is the best looking retro track in 8 Deluxe, and heck, it may even be one of the best looking tracks overall. Mario Kart 8's original Rainbow Road has always just looked really dull. I know they wanted to go with the space station design, but I feel like they muted the colors too much. N64 Rainbow Road though keeps its phenomenal bright colors and just makes it look gorgeous. On top of that, the background was made immensely more exciting here when compared to the original on the N64. In that version, it's just floating off in space with a few drawings of some characters. In Mario Kart 8 though, this takes place over a city, which adds a lovely amount of light to the background. The character drawings were now also replaced by fireworks, which I think are significantly more interesting to look at. The Mario Kart 8 version also adds a train flying over the track, which I don't really know why it was done, but it looks cool, so I like it. There is a very good reason this was chosen as the cover track for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I really don't think any other track could have fit better. Oh, and of course the music is fantastic here as well. I do think I prefer the 8 and 3DS Rainbow Road themes a bit more, but this is still a fantastic rendition of the song. Alongside its phenomenal aesthetic changes though, this track got updated a ton. Believe it or not though, the changes, or at least one change, is fairly controversial. If there is one thing the original N64 is known for, it's the length. This is by far the longest track in the Mario Kart franchise, on average taking around 6 minutes to complete. Every other track is usually around 2 minutes, so yeah, this is a massive jump. So Mario Kart 8 decided to change this track to being one split into 3 sections, so you only have to complete the course one time as opposed to the normal 3. While I can certainly understand why this may upset some people, I think this change was only a positive thing. The Mario Kart 8 Deluxe one is paced significantly better, because if this was 6 minutes long, I feel like a lot of people would rather not play on it. This length of the original N64 was also made even worse by how boring the track was, which I think we should get into now. Starting off the race, we immediately get our first change being anti-gravity, which just fits so well on Rainbow Road. In the original version of this track, this is just a big dip followed by a large uphill. There's nothing to do here though, so it's unsurprisingly pretty boring. The only somewhat interesting thing about this is that you could jump off the road and kind of float over it, but other than that, yeah, this is super lame. Mario Kart 8 though adds in a ton of speed panels, which is likely based on what Mario Kart Wii's Rainbow Road did, and then has the uphill section use a glider ramp. This makes the race both feel faster paced and actually gives something for the players to try and hit as they make their way down this straightaway. The changes don't end there though, as this turn is now an anti-gravity and has coins being thrown on it from the train above, once again giving the players something to actually collect while they race. Those aren't the only important changes though, as this highlights one major change to the track that I'm honestly shocked wasn't in the original. Rainbow Road is supposed to be the Mario Kart series' most difficult track, so why was the whole thing surrounded by guardrails on the N64 version? That removes pretty much all sense of challenge, which is why I was so happy Mario Kart 8 removed a large majority of them. Now you can actually fall off of turns, which makes taking them tightly all the more exciting. After this first turn here, we run into the track's first chain chomp. Now believe it or not, this was actually in Mario Kart 64, where they would chomp through the road. This was a fairly decent obstacle, but I think Mario Kart 8 made it way better. Now it bounces up and down off the track, causing it to become wavy. This gives the player a chance to trick off of it for some extra speed, which is much more interesting than a standard straightaway. Tricking can also send the players flying directly into the chain chomps, which gives a nice amount of risk here. This acts as Mario Kart 8's ending for Section 1, though as I already said, Mario Kart 64 is just a standard 3-lap course, so nothing of interest happens here. This is a good time to say though that the anti-gravity really goes a long way in making Mario Kart 8's version feel so much more exciting, even when there aren't many differences layout-wise. This turn is also long enough to get a purple spark in 8 Deluxe, which I always appreciate. We then run into another chain chomp section in both versions, with the same updates the first one had. This time though, Mario Kart 8 gets 2 chain chomps, which of course helps boost the excitement even more. From here until the last turn, both versions are just made up of several turns without any notable obstacles. 8's version though highlights the fact that there are very little guardrails, making these turns much better as there's an actual risk of falling off. Not to mention the train also comes back to drop a few more coins as well. But eventually we do reach that final turn, which has absolutely nothing going on in the Mario Kart 64 version. How exciting. In Mario Kart 8 though, there are now some additional boost panels for some last second speed. They're placed right at the edge too, which can make them scary to go for since again, no guardrails. But the biggest change here is the fact that the race ends with a glider. This just feels like such a great way to end a track, flying straight into the finish line. Yeah, this is one of the best remakes in the series. N64 Rainbow Road might honestly be my least favorite Rainbow Road ever, but this remake managed to save the track by actually giving it some interesting things. On top of that, it's also much shorter, meaning you aren't forced to race on it for any longer than necessary. What a fantastic way to end off this cup, and when all 4 of these tracks are looked at together, I really can't see how this isn't just the best retro cup the Mario Kart series has ever seen. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you all really like the Banana Cup because it has dry desert and hate me for saying the Lightning Cup was the best? Let me know in the comments. Honestly, the more I looked into this cup, the more I really liked it. I wouldn't blame anyone if they thought this was the best Mario Kart Cup of all time. While none of the tracks here quite reached the best of the Star Cup for me, I do still think this was more consistently good as it didn't have Dolphin Shoals. Oh, and I should probably say, all of these tracks belong in S tier except for Piranha Plant Slide, which I'd put in B tier. Sadly, I don't have a lot of time to edit this video, so I can't make the whole Mario Kart 8 level by level tier list right now, so just imagine they'd all be there. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.